Hello everyone, I'm Amir Alpha. Welcome to the first remade episode of Coaches of Amtrak. This is the series we're talking about the Coaches of Amtrak. Let's get into this episode, the Amfleet cars. On May 1st, 1971, Amtrak assumed control of almost all private sector inner-city passenger rail service in the United States, with a mandate to reverse decades of decline. It retained approximately 184 of the 440 trains which had run the day before. To operate these trains, Amtrak inherited a fleet of 300 locomotives and 1,190 passenger cars, most of which dated from 1940s to 1950s. These cars were aging and in need of maintenance, and in many cases incapable of each other. The company recognized the need and opportunity to standardize on a single design. Very few rail cars have been built for intercity service in the United States since the 1950s. The last locomotive-hauled cars were an order of 10 coaches built by a Pullman standard for the Kansas City Southern Railway in 1965. An important exception was the Budd Metroliner electric multiple unit. This fleet of 61 cars had begun operation between Washington, D.C. and New York City on the Northeast Corridor in 1969 under Penn Central and quickly gained acceptance with the traveling public, despite various engineering problems. Writing in the mid-1970s, the road historian John H. White, Jr. described him as Amtrak's brightest star. In 1973, Budd still had tooling in place for the Metroliner order, meaning that any new order derived from that design could be almost done at once. Amfleet 1. Amtrak placed a $24 million order with Budd on October 12, 1973, for 75 non-powered Metroliner cars. Amtrak expanded its plans in June 1974 and ordered 200 more cars for a cost of $81 million. On October 25th, it added another 35 cars. Finally, in April 1975, Amtrak added 200 more cars to the order for $86 million. This brought the first order to 492 cars, with a total cost of $192 million. Amtrak intended to use 212 of the cars on Northeast Corridor services between Washington and New York. Unlike the electric Metroliners, the Amfleet cars could continue to Boston, Massachusetts. The public unveiling took place at the Budd plant in Northeast Philadelphia on June 19, 1975. Afterwards, 4 cars were sent to the High-Speed Testing Ground Transportation Center in Pueblo, Colorado for evaluation. The first Amfleet cars began running on the Northeast Corridor on August 5, 1975. As new cars were distributed throughout the system, timetables would note that trains had Amfleet service, and that trains had been Amfleeted. A 1978 study conducted by the FRA found that ridership increased 11% on the Amfleet-equipped Northeast Corridor trains, with at least some passengers choosing the slower but more comfortable Amfleets over the faster but less reliable Metroliners. The rollout of Amfleets throughout the system was restricted by the availability of locomotives with head and power. The first route outside the Northeast Corridor to receive Amfleets was the Blue Ridge on December 1st. By November 1976, 350 Amfleets had been delivered, and 78% of Amtrak's short-haul trains had either Amfleets or equally modern Turboliner train sets. Besides the Blue Ridge, other routes outside the Northeast Corridor started using Amfleets. The Amfleet's modern head and power system provided invaluable Durham in the unusually harsh winter of 1976 to 1977, which sidelined many of Amtrak's aging steam-heated coaches. Amtrak suspended numerous routes and pressed short-distance Amfleet 1 coaches into long-distance service, but completed the delivery of the Amfleet 1 order on June 9, 1977. Amfleet 2. Amtrak ordered 150 more Amfleet cars from Budd on March 13, 1980, at a cost of $150 million. These cars, dubbed Amfleet 2, were intended to replace rolling stock on Amtrak's long-distance trains, and featured larger windows, more legroom, and folding leg rests. Budd delivered the first 4 cars on October 28, 1981. The unveiling took place on November 11th. Final cars arrived on June 11, 1983. The Amfleet 2s were the last intercity cars Budd built. The continual unreliability of the original Metroliners led to refurbishing Amfleet 1 coaches, displacing them into Metroliner service in 1981. Unlike the Superliner-equipped trains in the western United States, Amtrak's long-distance signal-level trains never operated with uniform consists. The trains operated with a combination of heritage cars, supplemented in the 1990s by Viewliner sleeping cars. In 1990, Amfleets could be found on every long-haul route east of the Mississippi. Horizon Fleet coaches replaced Amfleet cars on most Midwestern and California short-haul routes in 1989 to 1990. Superliner 2 order in the early 1990s would lead to the removal of Amfleets from Autotrain in the Capital Limited. Replacement. At the end of 2012, 473 Amfleet 1s and 145 Amfleet 2 cars were still in service. The Amfleet 1 cars had traveled an average of 4,125,000 miles. The Amfleet 2 cars, 5,640,000 miles. The Amfleet 1 cars continue to be used on corridor services in the Northeast United States, such as the Downeaster Empire Service and the Northeast Regional, although they can be found on Midwestern and California trains. Amfleet 2s continue to be used on single-level long-distance trains. Amtrak announced an overhaul of Amfleet 1 interiors in September 2017. The following year, Amtrak began to investigate options to replace the Amfleet 1 cars altogether. In January 2019, Amtrak issued a request for proposal to replace the 470 Amfleet 1 cars and ex-Metroliner cab cars then in use. Proposals are due on May 1st, 2019. Specifications. Both the Amfleet 1 and Amfleet 2 are rated for 125 miles an hour. Bud moved the air vents from the bottom, where they had been on the Metroliners, to the top of the car. The top-mounted vents were less acceptable to clogging during snowfall. An Amfleet car is 12 feet 8 inches tall, 10 feet 6 inches wide, and 85 feet 4 inches long. The car body itself is built of spot-welding stainless steel sections. The interior design recalled contemporary jet airliners. In common with airliners, the cars featured narrow windows, which inhabited sightseeing. The windows on the Amfleet 1 cars were 18 by 64 inches. This is increased to 22 by 64 inches in the Amfleet 2s. Amfleet 1 cars can be identified by having vestibules at both ends of the cars. Amfleet 2 cars have a single vestibule. All Amfleet cars have trapdoors permitting their use at both high and low platforms. Coaches. Bud built 361 Amfleet coaches. 90 were configured for long-distance use, and 271 for short-distance use. All 225 Amfleet 2 cars were designed for long-distance service and contained 59 seats. And all standard Amfleet coaches, seating is a 2x2. In the Amfleet 2s, a single accessible seat accounted for the odd number. Amfleet seats have a swung-down tray tails for a back-seat food service, as well as overhead and under-seat luggage storage. There are 2 restrooms at each end of the car. There are 2 restrooms at one end of each car. There is a baggage rack at the other end. Cafes. Bud built 54 Amfleet 1 Am Cafe cars and 37 Amfleet Am Dinette cars. The cafes have a snack bar in the middle of the car and 53 coach seats. The dinettes had 8 booths and 23 coach seats. The Am Cafe design was unpopular, and Amtrak rebuilt the cafes into numerous configurations during the 1980s and 1990s. These included all-table dinettes, club cars for use in Metroliner service, club dinettes with a mix of tables and club seating. By the 2010s, most cafes were configured as club dinettes. Some have been converted into all-table dinettes. By the 2010s, all the remaining dinettes are built into all-table seating, save 2 which are converted into short-distance coaches. Club cars. Bud built 40 Amfleet 1 Am Club cars, similar to traditional parlor cars. These cars had a snack bar in the center, 18 club seats in a 2x1 configuration, and 23 coach seats. These cars provided first-class service on select trains. None of the Am clubs remain in their original configuration. 3 of the original club cars were delivered with all club-style seating for a total of 33 seats. 3 were rebuilt for use on the Montrealer. Booths and lounge seating replaced the coach seating and club seating. These were later rebuilt as all-table dinettes. Most club cars were rebuilt as club dinette cars, with one half given over to booths and the other half having 2x1 seating. Others were rebuilt as full-length business class cars with 62 seats. Still others were converted to 72-seat coaches. Lounges. Bud built 25 Amfleet 2 lounge cars. They differed from the food service cars in that the snack bar was off-center. On the shorter side were 27, and the longer side had 10 4-seat booths. Amtrak rebuilt 14 of them as smoking lounges between 1998 and 2000. In the short end, an enclosed lounge replaced the seating area. All 25 cars were rebuilt as diner light cars between 2006 and 2010. In this configuration, the short end had 19 seats. The long end had 7 booths and a conductor's office. Sleeping cars. In the late 1970s, Amtrak converted 2 Amfleet 1 coaches into sleepers. 2 prototype Superliner modulars were installed, displacing 12 seats. In 1979, regular sleepers returned and the 2 coaches were returned to standard configuration. These conversions were termed Ampen. That wraps up this remade episode of Coaches of Amtrak. Thank you to all the sites and sources on screen for the information, photos, clips used in this video. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. That said, I'll talk to you guys in the next video where I'll talk about the Superliners.